New Thought Media Network is pleased to present Treasures from the Tao, live on Tuesdays at noon Mountain Time with Reverend Jody Hill-Stevenson. Join us as Reverend Jody shares wisdoms, inspirations, and treasures from the Tao every Tuesday here on the New Thought Media Network. And here is Reverend Jody.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Treasures from the Tao. I always love having you in my home. I wish we could all sit around and talk about philosophy. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So I want to welcome you here on March 2nd. I can't believe it. And the theme for March is generosity. It's one of my favorite words because of its long history. It has a very long history, and the meaning of generosity has transformed over the generations. So I won't go into the long journey of this word, but I do want to share with you a few aspects of generosity. So the modern English word generosity derives from the Latin word generosus, which means of noble birth. The Latin stems gener is the first cousin of genius. I thought you might want to know that, meaning kin, clan, race, or stock, with the root Indo-European meaning of gen, meaning to beget. So, up until the 16th century, generous was used to reflect an aristocratic sense of being of noble lineage or high birth. So Robert, I'm going to ask you to stop the thing at the bottom. There you go. Thank you. I love having him behind the scene. Oh, thank you, Robert. So up until the 16th century, you could go around town and go, I am generous, and everyone would know that you're from a noble family. During the 17th century, something began to shift, however, and the meaning and the use of the word began to change. The word generosity transformed from a high noble family heritage to a nobility of spirit. Isn't that fun? That was in the 17th century. Now today, in the 21st century, generosity is a way of being. If somebody says you are generous, everybody knows that you are being talked about as someone with a high spirit. In the realm of having a high spirit, a person who is generous knows that they come from the same source as everything else, that there's a oneness, there's a wholeness in the universe. And depending on how much we want to be successful in our lives, we will be generous with our time and our talents and our ties, and enjoy the magic of the universal love unfolding in our everyday life. An old man once turned to his young son and said, boy, a fight is going on inside of me. I have this fight that never stops. It's a terrible fight between two wolves. And the young son is looking at his dad like, well, tell me more. And the dad said, well, one wolf is evil. He's angry and envious and filled with sorrow and regret and greed and arrogance and self-pity and guilt and resentment and inferiority, and he lies and he has false pride and he's has a superiority sense about him. It's a false one. And his ego is so big you can't even want to be around him. The young son said, ooh, what's the other wolf? And the father said, well, the other wolf is generous. He is joy and peace and love and hope and serenity and humility and kindness and benevolent, empathic, generous, truth, compassionate, and has a deep faith in the source of who he is. He lives in the very center of his Tao. And you know, son, the same fight is going on with you. And the young son looks at his wise dad and thought about it for a minute, and then he asked, so which wolf will end in my life? And the dad looks at him and says, the one that you feed. This story comes from Wendy Moss, Jeremy Fink, and The Meaning of Life. You know, when I was in ministerial school in the 80s, it was a time of great transformation in my life. And I mean, everything was transforming. My physical life, my marriage, my beingness, everything was changing. And it was a topsy-turvy kind of experience. I wasn't sure what I was doing and where I was going, and I was growing up finally. And one of my professors looked at me and said, Jody, you have two choices. To come from a generosity spirit of love, you have two choices. You can either stay bitter for all that's gone on in your life, or you can get better. And if you're going to be generous, you're going to do the work to get better. So there are some basic truths about being generous in our daily lives. The first one is generosity transcends religious beliefs, cultural mores, and race. It's not just for the quote unquote noble families. And number two, true generosity can never be used up. Isn't that wonderful? We can never be too generous. And number three, generosity is in such a way that it can cost you nothing. And generosity, number four, can never happen too soon. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, you cannot do an act of kindness too soon because you never know how soon it will be too late. And number five, generosity can radically change a struggling to a vibrantly healthy and prosperous business. Winston Churchill says, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Some of the best training I ever received for my 35 years of being in the ministry was when I was a young girl, older teenager into my 20s. And I was working as a clerk in a department store at Christmas time. Oh my God, quite literally. I'll never forget the experience that I had. I think it was about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. It was at Christmas time. I actually went to Macy's and I got my 6 or 7 things I was buying for my sons and my family. And I went and I looked at where can I buy my things, and I saw a very long line. There were probably 15 people waiting to get up to the clerk, one clerk for all of us at Christmas time. So I thought, I'm going to stand here. And I looked around at the other place. All the other clerks were really busy too. And I thought, I'm going to enjoy this. So I'm standing in line and I'm watching the clerk because I've been there. And I mean, she was like, oh my God. And people were like really nasty to her. Like, Macy's is just, they need to get another clerk and you're not going fast enough and you're not good enough. And she was just like this. And the woman in front of me turned around and said, I can't believe I've had to wait this long. And I said, you know, the gal is really doing a good job. I've done that work. I know what it's like. And let's just kind of give her a little bit of love. And she went, I am so busy in my life. I said, I bet you have a really important life. I know, I think we all do. And it's not the clerk's fault. So I got up to the clerk and I looked at her and I gave her my things and she was just, and I said, you know, I want to just share with you that you're really doing a good job. And she just looked at me and said, why are you saying that? And I said, well, first of all, I've been where you are. And secondly, I've been watching you. And you're under a lot of stress and a lot of people are being really crabby with you and they're being rude. And I just want you to know you're doing a really good job. And she said, don't you be nice to me, because if you're nice to me, I'm going to burst out in tears. And she started sobbing. I said, I've been there, I know. You're still doing a great job. Just cry. And take a couple of deep breaths and go really slow with wrapping up my package here. And just take a couple of deep breaths. She looked at me and she said, I'm crying. And I said, it's a good thing. Just keep crying. And I said, I think that you are doing such a good job that I want to go get you, you know, Starbucks is right below. I'm going to go get you a Frappuccino. She just looked at me and I said, she said to me, a Frappuccino? You're willing to get me a Frappuccino? And I said, I'm willing to put caramel in it if that's what you need. She went, a caramel Frappuccino? I said, yeah, you deserve that. It's okay. She went, oh my God. Okay. She wiped her tears and she wrapped everything up. And I went down and I got a caramel Frappuccino and I brought it back. And by then there were 13, 15 other people in line. And she had released so much of her stress and so much of her sorrow that she could be more present. And I just, you know, put the Frappuccino on the counter and, oh my goodness. And I put the Frappuccino on the counter and winked at her and I went like this. She went, oh, thank you. Now, I tell you this story not at all to get a pat on my back because I don't need it. I don't want it. But I wanted to share with you how inexpensive and how life-changing a generous act of kindness can be. The opportunities are everywhere, everywhere. So I got permission from my husband to tell this story. When we first started dating, I noticed that he's a handyman, and we would go into like I point over here because it's over here and over here and about half a mile from our home. We would go into Home Depot, and he's a handyman, so he's busy and he's looking at things. But I noticed that he never thanked the people who helped him. And one day we had a little conversation about that. I said, do you consider yourself a generous man? And he said, yeah, I like to tithe and I like to give. And I said, but you're really kind of rude to the clerks. Having been a clerk, I'm like, you know, a mother bear. Excuse me. And I said, I would ask you to take on gratitude as a form of generosity this week. And so he has. And he said, we were talking about it, excuse me, we were talking about it this morning. He said, I feel so much more peaceful living in a state of generosity. So this week, I'm going to ask you to think about generosity. This week, I'm going to ask you to find ways to be kind, to offer your time and talents and ties joyously, and to really ponder the meaning of this great spiritual practice, and especially and totally and completely be generous to the one in the mirror, because that one needs you to be more generous with your kindness and your compassion and your love than anyone else in your life. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next week.